Hey crew, I don't think we'll quite finish the notes today, but we will make a pretty good dent. And the plan is that on Wednesday, you guys will have. We're working ahead enough in the notes that I think we'll be able to buy the time for you all to watch that video today. If you finish early with the notes, I'd like you to knock out a few of those ed puzzles, or kind of knock out some more of that reading guide, because we're closing in and I want to make sure that you have that stuff set before we work on the shower curtains here in a couple weeks. Remind me, later this week we're going to be introducing the shower curtains, and we're also going to start our Valentine activity. Oh, and with the Valentines, we are also going to do a food day on Valentine's Day. So we can talk about that as we get closer. Just remind me to give you a heads up because I want to make sure you got plenty of time to plan. So today's topic for the flip notes today is the working class. And so we weren't together, but I spoke about the new middle class and kind of those who benefited most from the Industrial Revolution. But most people fall into this working class category. The working class, today, we would refer to them as blue collar and even the working poor, kind of that area. This group is going to grow in numbers. Few, if any, luxuries are truly available. They work hard to pay the bills. This is the paycheck by paycheck group. These are the factory workers. They work the dangerous work. And oftentimes they have to work as multiple machines as fast as they possibly can. They work barefoot in the factories because shoes have steel nails in the bottom that if you hit the metal on the floor, it can cause a spark, which would cause a fire. Those of you, when you take U.S. history, if you haven't already, will hear about like the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire and about how safety is just not a concern with these factory owners at all. And accidents are really common. There is no such thing as workers' compensation. It's monotonous work. It's noisy. It's heavy. There's a strict schedule of 10 to 14 hours a day in an unventilated room with maybe 30 minutes for lunch. And that's it. That's all you get for the entire day. Diseases like pneumonia and tuberculosis are common because the air quality, both the air quality outside from the smog and the soot and from the power of the factories, but also the air quality inside. You start to see a disease that they call white lung, which is those fine particles of fabric and stuff in the air that are breathed in and then coating the lungs. Wages are extremely low, and you can pay a woman half what you would pay a man, and you can pay a child a quarter what you would pay a man. So women and children are often sought out as workers because you can pay them less to do the same amount of work. Some women are going to enjoy the sense of independence that comes with that, making money, making friends. These are called the mill girls. If you've read, there's a children's book about an American mill girl named Lydia, and she loses family on the farm and then moves into the cities, the Lowell Mills in Massachusetts, and during the second wave of the Industrial Revolution. And it's kind of her helping to support her younger brother. Women have no rights. Unions, as they kind of start moving towards issues of safety and issues of fair pay, also move towards working for women as well, since a lot of the workers are women. So it's kind of one of those things that sparks the women's movement. All members of the family are going to work. Even children as young as 6, you could argue even as young as 4, are working in the factories. Children are working 12-hour shifts, sometimes through the night, often because their bones are softer as they grow. They become crippled and they become ill. One of the children you're going to meet is a guy named, the story is a boy named Ben, whose legs are so bow-legged that he could hold a basketball between his knees while he's standing up straight. There's no school. So in 1843, by the way, the factors, before I get to 1843, by the way, factory owners were all about orphans because they would go through the orphanages and say, you know what, the government doesn't have to pay for the care of these children. I'll employ them and they'll make money. And because they're orphans, there's nobody to protect them. And so there's a lot of abuse that happens, both physical, mental, health abuse, if you want to call health abuse. So there's a law that declared that children under the age of, they're supposed to say 11, were banned from working in coal mines, and education begins to become mandatory. Now, it's not education like you have to high school, but basics of reading and writing. So the focus on education, as opposed to working for monetary gain, is what's going to permanently redefine the role of children and the idea of a childhood in urban society. This idea that you have several years where your job is to become literate. And a literate society is going to become a more industrious society. Oddly enough, people start to realize that having an educated society actually makes the whole group more economically viable. So where are they living? They're living in overcrowded, smoky cities, those cold apartment complexes near the factories. These are going to be called tenements. You need to understand the word tenement because they'll use that. Whole families are going to live in 1 to 2 rooms. Human and industrial waste contaminate the water supplies and spread diseases. There's not really a filtration system, open sewers, that kind of thing. You guys are familiar with the awnings that are on the fronts of buildings over sidewalks? That all starts not to protect people from rain, but to protect people from the chamber pots, the pot you would go pee and poop in during the night. They would open the window and yell, "Gardeloo!" And that meant I'm tossing a pot of human waste out into the streets. And those awnings were to protect people from the stuff dripping down. That's also why women carried around parasols. Pretty gross stuff. So there are a few my daughter's sitting next to me as I'm making these notes, and her eyes are huge. Nothing like a little history lesson, huh, Mia? So right about now is where that video fits, but I'm going to link it tomorrow. Okay, so workers begin to complain and demand better working conditions. There's going to be definitely in England a real push for health and safety. They knew they were stronger as a group than as individuals, and so you have the start of labor unions. These are organizations of workers created to put pressure on businesses to improve conditions, and wages. This starts in the 1850s, but it's not really until 1820 or 1920s that labor unions are actually legal. And you'll read about and hear about, gosh, it's in movies, of these union busters. People will go out there with baseball bats and break kneecaps to bust up the unions. So ways that unions worked. There would be nationwide organization and cooperation. There'd be strategic strikes, collective bargaining, where union leaders and employers would meet together to discuss problems and reach an agreement before you reach the point for a strike. So you would strategically have a meeting, say, once a quarter, once a year, once a month, whatever you agree to. And the union leaders would bring the complaints, and they would meet with the employers, and together they would try and find a solution before the factory gets shut down because of striking. And there's always the threat of violence. Sometimes they would destroy machines and disrupt the power supply and that kind of thing, because the factory worker needs the factory working. And if the factory is shut down, that's days without income, money. So John Stuart Mills is going to be the one who really pushes for laws that allow labor unions to be legal, that limit child labor, and to push for safer working conditions. His ideas are really controversial at the time, but a lot of those ideas that he puts forth are commonplace in societies today. His philosophy was called the utilitarianism, the idea that the greatest good for the greatest number of people. And in fact, that phrase, the greatest good for the greatest number, is a common phrase today in the U.S. with emergency training. FEMA training like my emergency training that I did through FEMA as a community emergency response person, is the greatest good for the greatest number. So if I come across a natural disaster and there's a guy, screaming that his leg hurts, and I look in front of him and I see people trying to come out of a building that's getting ready to collapse, I'm going to walk right by the guy in front of me, because my job is to do the greatest good for the greatest number of people and get those people out. Karl Marx is probably the most famous one. He viewed industrial capitalism as an unstable system that's doomed to collapse. And it would collapse during a period of revolutionary upheaval, which would create a classless society. And when you get to that point, then there's no longer a difference between rich and poor. Now, he says that this is like an evolutionary thing. So you can't subvert his system. When he talks about this classless system, it is not communism the way we talk about communism in, say, Russia, or we talk about China. That Marx would look at that and say, that's not what I'm talking about. You're not ready. This is an evolutionary thing. Like trying to expect a 2-year-old to, I don't know, what's something that adults can do? Jump with 2 feet even. There's a developmental process. You have to build muscles in order to get there. So Marx would say society is the same way. It has to go through processes and it has to learn before it's ready for this classless society. But he says the two groups in society are the haves and the have-nots. The haves are the bourgeoisie. When you guys talk about somebody being so bougie, that's the bourgeoisie. You can kind of keep that parallel in your head. There's a reason that phrase is kind of used the way it was. The other group is the proletariat. The proletariat are the have-nots. They're the working class. They're the ones are often doing the most amount of labor for the least amount of compensation. This idea is going to inspire socialist movements of workers and intellectuals throughout Europe. There's a socialist political party that develops. They can contest some elections. They push for reform. Sometimes they plot revolutions. So what are they focused on? They kind of help push the working class to move away from the kind of revolutionary thing that happens with the socialists. So people see the socialists coming and they freak out and they say, okay, we've got to improve some things so these guys don't run amok. So wages are going to increase. The fact that food can be imported rather cheaply helps improve diets so people are healthier. And because moms are healthier and there's more variety of food available, there's less infant mortality as well. You start seeing businesses cater to that working class, so cheap goods readily available locally. You see suffrage spread to male workers. Child labor gets abolished. Now, child labor means kind of under the age of 10, but still, it's a movement in the right direction. Factory conditions are regulated and improvements happen. This is kind of the start of what we refer to today as OSHA, or depending on when you're state, MSHA, whatever. Systems of relief for the unemployed. This idea of you're not just relying on the kindness of neighbors. There's actually systems built in with the government, places to stay, places to eat, that kind of thing. And sanitation reform. If it's clean, you're healthier. So there's a lot that happens to and with the working class during this time. I think I'm going to stop here because the next couple slides, if I remember correctly, kind of looking at the reform movements of government. And so we'll stop it there. So anytime you've got left, please knock out some ed puzzles. Please, work on improving your yellow note packet. You really kind of want that done because, well, you've got that reading quiz, should be about done. And then you might start thinking about what you want to include in your shower curtain. And we're going to start talking about that because I really do want you guys to be able to plan that. All right. So I shall see you all again tomorrow, and